In 1947, Keiko, a young Japanese woman, arrives in small-town America as a war bride after marrying Staff Sergeant Robert Miller during the post-war occupation. When she steps into the imposing two-story Victorian house that will be her new home, she freezes, overwhelmed not just by its unfamiliar grandeur, but by the weight of leaving everything she knew behind. As curious neighbors peer through curtains and her new husband struggles to understand her silence, Keiko must navigate the delicate balance between honoring her heritage and embracing an uncertain future in a country that recently viewed her people as enemies. This is the story of one woman's quiet courage, as she transforms a foreign house into a home, one small act of belonging at a time. A vast American landscape unfolded outside the train window, a dizzying panorama of endless fields and unfamiliar towns that seemed to rush past in a blur. Keiko, a young woman barely into her 20s, watched it all with a quiet intensity, her heart a fragile vessel holding a mix of apprehension and a tenacious, fragile hope. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was a constant companion, a percussive reminder of the immense distance she had traveled from her homeland. Just months before, her world had been a tapestry of bombed-out streets in the quiet, enduring spirit of post-war Japan. The memory of rubble-strewn alleys, the stark reality of scarcity, and the profound changes wrought by war still lingered in her mind. Now, these memories contrasted sharply with the verdant green fields and prosperous-looking farmhouses that dotted the American countryside. She closed her eyes for a moment, and a brief, evocative flash of her past played out. It was a humble tea house in Tokyo, dimly lit but warm with the steam of brewing tea. She was serving, a young woman in a simple kimono, her gaze meeting that of a kind American soldier, Staff Sergeant Robert Miller. Their eyes had locked across the room, and in that fleeting instant, a spark had ignited. Their conversations, halting at first, had slowly built a fragile bridge between two vastly different worlds, their shared laughter a surprising melody amidst the chaos of occupation. He had made promises, earnest ones, of a new life, a future together in his distant homeland. The enormity of her decision, leaving her family, her language, her entire culture behind for a man she barely knew, in a country that had recently been her nation's enemy, settled upon her. "This is home now," she whispered to herself, a mantra she hoped would eventually become true. She clutched a small, worn photograph of her family, its edges softened by countless touches, her only tangible link to the life she had left behind. The train jolted, then hissed to a final stop. Keiko opened her eyes, feeling the surge of anticipation and anxiety ripple through the carriage. She gathered her modest belongings, her single suitcase a symbol of her journey. Stepping onto the bustling platform of a small American town, she was immediately enveloped by a cacophony of foreign sounds and the curious stares of strangers. Robert was there, just as he had promised, scanning the faces of the disembarking passengers. His eyes, full of a nervous eagerness, found hers, and a relieved smile spread across his face. Their reunion was tender, yet restrained, a quick embrace that spoke volumes of their shared journey and the immense weight of the choices they had made. As they held each other, Keiko felt the curious, assessing eyes of the townsfolk. Whispers followed them, some merely curious, others carrying an undeniable undercurrent of disapproval, particularly from a cluster of older women dressed in their Sunday best. Robert, sensing her discomfort, tried to shield her, but the scrutiny was impossible to ignore. They drove through the town in Robert's old pickup truck, the vehicle bouncing slightly on the paved roads. Robert, eager to make her feel at ease, pointed out various landmarks. "That's the general store," he said, gesturing with his hand. "And over there, the post office where I'll get your letters from Japan." Keiko nodded, trying to absorb it all, but her mind reeled from the sensory overload. The unfamiliar architecture, the loud cars, the strange-looking people. It was all so utterly new, so very different. Finally, they turned down a tree-lined street and pulled up to a grand, two-story Victorian house. Its ornate gingerbread trim, the towering bay windows, and the freshly painted facade loomed over them, an imposing structure that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. It was a stark and overwhelming contrast to the simple, elegant lines of her family home in Japan. Keiko stepped out of the truck, her single suitcase still clutched in her hand, and froze at the sight of it. The house, with its almost sentient presence, felt enormous, almost predatory, a symbol of everything foreign and intimidating she now faced. Robert, noticing her sudden hesitation, gently took her hand. "It's okay, Keiko," he said, his voice soft. "Come on in. This is home now." Inside, the house felt even larger. The foyer was spacious, adorned with dark wood and heavy furniture. Martha Miller, Robert's mother, a woman in her 50s with a kind but cautious demeanor, emerged from a parlor to greet them. Her embrace for Robert was tight and warm, filled with the relief of a mother seeing her son return from war. But her smile for Keiko was more reserved, a polite formality rather than genuine warmth. "And you must be Keiko," she stated, her tone neither welcoming nor entirely unwelcoming. Keiko performed a slight bow, a gesture of respect ingrained in her, which seemed out of place in the ornate American hallway. "Yes," she replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for having me." From the shadows of the living room, William Miller, Robert's father, a serious man also in his 50s, observed them. His eyes, those of a veteran, were assessing, his expression unreadable. Sally Miller, Robert's spirited 16-year-old sister, peered curiously from the top of the grand staircase. "Hi," she mumbled, a mix of shyness and youthful interest in her voice. Keiko offered a timid wave in return. The first dinner in the Miller household was an exercise in unspoken tension. Keiko, accustomed to chopsticks and small, delicate bowls, struggled silently with the heavy American silverware, the fork feeling impossibly clumsy in her hand. The rich, unfamiliar flavors of the roast beef and mashed potatoes were overwhelming, so different from the subtle tastes of her native cuisine. Robert, noticing her discomfort, tried discreetly to assist, nudging a glass of water closer or offering a small piece of bread. William, breaking the uncomfortable silence, addressed Keiko directly. "So Keiko," he began, his voice gravelly, "what do you think of America so far?" Keiko hesitated, carefully choosing her words, her limited English making every sentence a deliberate effort. "It is different," she managed, her gaze flickering to Robert for reassurance. "But I am grateful to be here." William merely grunted in response, his expression still unreadable, leaving Keiko with the distinct impression that her gratitude was insufficient. Later that night, Keiko found herself sitting on the edge of the vast, soft bed in her new room. It felt enormous, the plush mattress and heavy quilts threatening to swallow her whole. The room itself was a riot of unfamiliar patterns and colors, busy floral wallpaper competing with dark, imposing furniture. It was a stark contrast to the minimalist simplicity of her room in Japan. She opened her suitcase, retrieving the small, worn photograph of her family. Her fingers traced the faded faces, her mother, her father, her younger sister. A profound wave of homesickness washed over her, and silent tears began to stream down her face. She missed the familiar sounds of her village, the scent of tatami mats, the comforting cadence of her mother's voice. Robert, concerned by her prolonged absence, knocked gently and entered. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice soft. Keiko shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He sat beside her, his presence a quiet comfort, yet his words, "It'll get easier, I promise," felt distant, hollow. The following morning, determined to contribute and perhaps to find a small piece of familiarity, Keiko rose early. She ventured into the kitchen, a large, well-equipped space with appliances that gleamed with an intimidating efficiency. She carefully pulled out her limited ingredients, intent on preparing a simple Japanese breakfast of rice and miso soup. She moved with an innate grace, a fluid dance of precision and quiet purpose, but the unfamiliar stove and cumbersome pots presented unexpected challenges. Martha, drawn by the unusual aromas, entered the kitchen, a look of surprise on her face. "What are you making?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Keiko offered a shy, hopeful smile. "Rice and miso soup. Breakfast." Martha chuckled softly, a sound that held no malice but highlighted the cultural chasm between them. "Here, we usually have eggs and bacon, dear," she explained gently. "Let me show you." Keiko watched attentively as Martha bustled about, expertly preparing a typical American breakfast. Keiko tried a bite, keeping her expression neutral, but the rich, salty flavors were strange to her palate. Later, needing to understand her new surroundings, Keiko ventured out alone. As she walked along the town's neat sidewalks past its charming shop fronts, She felt the palpable weight of the townsfolk's scrutiny. Whispers followed her like a shadow. Children pointed openly, their curiosity uninhibited. Some adults avoided her gaze, their discomfort clear, while others stared with an unconcealed mixture of suspicion and curiosity. She stepped into a small grocery store, hoping to buy some familiar ingredients. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a perpetually suspicious gaze, looked her up and down. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped. Keiko, her English still hesitant, struggled to articulate her request. "Rice, please," she finally managed. The man handed her a bag of rice, his movements brusque, his silence more telling than words. From another aisle, Mrs. Thompson, a gentle-faced woman in her 70s, observed the exchange. She offered Keiko a small, kind smile. It was a fleeting gesture, but Keiko felt a sudden, unexpected warmth spread through her, a small flicker of human connection in the coldness of the reception. She nodded her gratitude. The language barrier was a constant source of frustration and isolation. Daily interactions became a minefield of potential misunderstandings, each misspoken word or misinterpreted gesture a fresh wound to her already fragile confidence. Robert, seeing her struggle, found an English class at the local community center. Keiko, though reluctant, agreed. Sitting amongst other immigrants, she felt a shared sense of displacement, yet her isolation remained unique. She was a Japanese war bride, a symbol of a recent painful conflict, and the unspoken prejudices were palpable. The teacher, a patient woman, wrote simple phrases on the board, and Keiko repeated them, her thick accent a constant reminder of her foreignness. Robert, eager for her to adapt, sometimes pushed too hard, not fully grasping the depth of her struggle. He would offer well-meaning advice. "Just try to speak up, Keiko," or "don't be afraid to ask." But he couldn't bridge the chasm of fear and cultural difference that often left her retreating into a quiet, almost impenetrable silence. Martha, meanwhile, took it upon herself to educate Keiko in the ways of an American housewife. She tried to teach Keiko American cooking methods, proper household etiquette, and the social customs of their small town. Keiko, accustomed to her own traditional ways, found herself perpetually out of sync. She struggled with unfamiliar recipes, the strange measurements, and the sheer volume of ingredients that went into an American meal. One afternoon, attempting to bake a cake, she accidentally doubled the salt instead of the sugar. The resulting dessert was inedible, leading to a mix of Martha's exasperated laughter and Keiko's quiet despair. She felt she was failing at everything, a burden rather than a welcome addition to the household. Robert, returning from his job, would often find her alone in the large house. The silence of the American afternoon, so different from the bustling energy of Japanese city life, felt oppressive. She would wander through the rooms, a ghost in her own home trying to find a sense of purpose. She cleaned, she rearranged, she tidied, but the emptiness remained. She longed for intellectual stimulation, for someone who could truly understand the nuances of her feelings. In moments of quiet solitude, she would take out a small notebook and sketch, a habit from her youth, drawing the familiar landscapes and scenes of Japan, her heart aching for their simple familiarity. Martha insisted that Keiko accompany them to church. Keiko, dressed in the modest American clothes Martha had provided, observed the rituals, the hymns, and the sermons, understanding little but feeling the solemnity of the occasion. Some congregants offered polite greetings, a few even attempting a hesitant smile, but many maintained a respectful yet palpable distance. Later, at a town picnic, Keiko tried to engage, her English still halting but improving. Sally, with youthful enthusiasm, introduced her to some friends who, though curious, were more open-minded than many of the adults. However, the brittle peace was shattered when Keiko overheard a snide comment from Agnes, a woman known for her sharp tongue and prejudiced views. "Japs taking our men," Agnes muttered loudly to a companion, her gaze pointedly fixed on Keiko. Keiko felt a familiar sting, a raw ache of rejection, and she retreated, her shoulders slumping. A thin airmail envelope arrived one day, bearing the unfamiliar stamps of Japan. It was her first letter from her family. The news was a bittersweet mix of survival and hardship, tales of rebuilding and loss. The letter underscored the vast distance that separated her from her loved ones, and the immense personal sacrifices she had made. A profound ache for her homeland, for the simple, comforting familiarity of her old life settled deep within her. Robert found her later, quietly weeping, the letter clutched in her hand. He sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, trying once more to bridge the emotional gap with his presence, if not with words. The seeds of friendship, however, began to sprout in the most unexpected of places, the garden. Keiko had noticed Mrs. Thompson, her kind neighbor, tending her own vibrant garden next door. Inspired, Keiko began transforming a neglected corner of the miller's vast yard into a small, meticulous Japanese-style garden. She carefully arranged stones, creating miniature landscapes, and planted flowers with deliberate precision, striving for harmony and balance. Mrs. Thompson, observing Keiko's patient work, eventually crossed the invisible boundary between their yards. "That's lovely," she commented, her voice soft and genuine. Keiko looked up, surprised, a faint flush rising on her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied, her English still imperfect but gaining confidence. Mrs. Thompson, her eyes twinkling, offered advice on local soil and climate, sharing gardening tips and stories of her own prized roses. Their shared love for nature, the quiet language of growing things, transcended their cultural differences, forging a silent, deep friendship. Mrs. Thompson introduced Keiko to local plant species, explaining their uses and histories, patiently teaching her new words and concepts. Encouraged by Mrs. Thompson's kindness and her own growing confidence, Keiko tentatively began to introduce aspects of her own culture to the Miller family. She taught Sally a simple origami fold, the delicate paper crane taking shape under her patient fingers, much to the young girl's delight. Sally, fascinated by this new art, began to see Keiko not just as her brother's wife, but as a source of wonder and creativity. One evening, with Martha's gentle guidance, Keiko took charge of the kitchen, preparing a Japanese meal for the entire family. She meticulously crafted tempura, the crispy fried vegetables and shrimp, a new culinary experience for the Millers. Initial apprehension from Martha and William gave way to genuine enjoyment, and even William offered a rare nod of approval, declaring, "Not bad, Keiko. Not bad at all." During an upcoming American holiday, Keiko subtly incorporated a Japanese element into the celebration, perhaps arranging a breathtaking floral display or presenting a unique side dish she had learned to adapt to local ingredients, symbolizing her gradual integration. But the path to acceptance was not without its thorns. One afternoon, while Keiko was shopping at the local market with Sally, Agnes, the prejudiced townswoman, confronted her directly. "Still haven't gone back to where you belong, have you, you little Jap?" Agnes sneered, her voice loud enough to draw glances from passers-by. "Taking our boys, coming over here with your foreign ways." Keiko felt the familiar knot of fear and anger tighten in her stomach, but this time, instead of retreating into silence, something shifted within her. Her English, though not flawless, had improved immensely. She met Agnes's hostile gaze with a quiet dignity. "My husband fought for this country," Keiko stated, her voice steady, "and I lost family to this war, just as many here did. My ways are not foreign, they are simply different, and I am learning." Her unexpected composure, her directness, stunned Agnes into silence. Mrs. Thompson, who had been nearby, stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Keiko's arm. "Agnes," she said, her voice firm, "that's enough. Keiko is a good woman, and she is a part of this community now." Sally, too, spoke up, her young voice full of indignation. "Leave her alone, Mrs. Agnes. She's teaching me things you wouldn't understand." Other townspeople, witnessing Keiko's quiet strength and the support she received, began to look at her in a new light, challenging Agnes's ingrained hate. William, later hearing about the incident from Robert, had a moment of quiet reflection, the last vestiges of his own subtle prejudice beginning to crumble. Keiko's English flourished. She began to read local newspapers, engage in more complex conversations, and even venture opinions of her own. Her voice, once hesitant, now carried a quiet authority. At the community center, the English teacher, impressed by Keiko's progress and her cultural knowledge, approached her with an unexpected proposition. "Keiko," she said, "we've had so much interest in Japanese culture. Would you consider teaching a class on calligraphy?" Keiko, initially hesitant, overwhelmed by the thought of standing before others, eventually agreed. The class was a resounding success, drawing a diverse group of students, including Sally and even a few curious townspeople who had previously kept their distance. Keiko, demonstrating the intricate brushstrokes, explaining the meaning behind each character, found a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer just Robert's wife or a foreign curiosity. She was a teacher, a bridge between cultures. This act of publicly sharing her heritage gave Keiko a deep sense of value and confidence. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time since her arrival. Her relationship with Robert deepened. They communicated more openly, sharing their fears and hopes, the unspoken anxieties that had lingered between them finally given voice. Robert, in turn, made an effort to learn Japanese phrases, fumbling with the unfamiliar sounds, and Keiko patiently taught him about her traditions, her stories, her dreams. Moments of quiet intimacy grew, built not just on romantic love, but on a foundation of shared experiences and mutual respect. They realized their love was stronger, more resilient, for having navigated these complex cultural waters together. The town hosted its annual summer festival, a vibrant celebration of community. Keiko, now an active member of the community center, volunteered to help. She set up a calligraphy booth, patiently demonstrating her art to curious children and adults alike. She also contributed a beautiful Japanese dish to the potluck, its exotic flavors a delightful surprise to many. Throughout the day, she was openly embraced by many townspeople. The shopkeeper, the same man who had been curt with her months ago, approached her, his face softening into a genuine smile. "Keiko," he said, "I wanted to apologize for my earlier demeanor. You've brought so much to our town." It was a small gesture, but for Keiko, it was a profound moment of acceptance. The grand Victorian house, once an intimidating symbol of her displacement, had slowly, subtly transformed. Keiko had begun to personalize it, subtly blending Japanese aesthetics with American comfort. A delicate scroll depicting a tranquil landscape now adorned a wall in the living room. A beautifully crafted tea set graced a small table, and a strategically placed shoji screen created a quiet nook in the sunroom. Her garden outside flourished, a vibrant testament to her patient labor, a harmonious blend of Japanese serenity and American abundance. The house no longer felt foreign. It had become their home, a place where both their cultures, once so disparate, now coexisted in a quiet, comforting harmony. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Keiko stood on the porch of her home. Her gaze swept across the familiar streets of the small town. Her expression was one of profound peace, resilience, and quiet triumph. The house, once a looming presence, now felt like an extension of herself. She held a freshly written letter in her hand, addressed to her family in Japan. It was not a letter filled with homesickness, but with stories of a new kind of home found, a life built on courage and connection. She wrote of her improving English, of her new friends, of the small joys she found in her garden and her calligraphy class. She spoke of the strength she had discovered within herself, a strength forged in the crucible of adaptation. "This is home now," she wrote, finally able to inscribe the words with genuine truth. Robert joined her on the porch, his arm gently encircling her waist. They shared a silent, knowing look, a gentle touch, both having grown immeasurably through their shared journey. The town slowly awakened around them, lights twinkling on in the gathering dusk, a place that was now truly home. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us create more stories for you.